Guruve Gaura Chanjaya Radhikaya Tadare Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tad Bhaktaya Namo Namaha Vancha Kalpatrubhyascha Kripa Sindhuvevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Shri Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. My Dandavat Pranam, devotees. So, I have to catch up on some questions and answers that have been in my message box for some time, and I'm apologizing that I'm jumping the queue, so to speak, and commenting on some inquiries that came in only today. And the reason I'm doing that is because it's about a podcast that just took place, and so I'm trying to give some reflection in the immediacy of the podcast. It doesn't mean that certainly after more deep reflection and contemplation, there might not be adjustments or even different insights that I may present, but I'm just giving response to the sort of first stimuli, so to speak, of the podcast, its content, and of course, obviously, I cannot cover the whole content of the podcast, and I would suggest I put the title in the title of this video. You can go back and listen and make personal assessments. Again, also, as I actually commented on the thread of the podcast, that my reflections are personal, and it's not meant for imposition of thought to anyone else, but it is a response to those who've asked me about my personal reflection, and whatever weight they give to that, is, again, their personal decision. So the title of the podcast was Integrative Sexuality, Beyond Guilt and Repression. The devotees who are involved in the podcast, again, I never mention names on these situations, so you can go back looking up the podcast, then you can, well, I think I will mention only the name. One person who's been a friend of mine for a couple of years ago now, we've met and been able to have communication and talk and develop friendship, Pujapad Padmanabh Maharaj, and he was the one who was sponsoring the podcast. It's his podcast, and I guess he's interviewing another devotee, and they're just having a discussion on this topic and bringing out certain points of mutual illumination according to their vision. So, again, my reflection is a personal reflection. I've only spoken Maharaj's name so that you can access the podcast. Maharaj also has a book out, and he'll talk about the book, and I have not had a chance to access the book yet and read the book in full. We've only had a very minor discussion about the book and so forth and so on. But I know Maharaj to be a learned devotee and a serious devotee. So I suggest people can contact Maharaj personally to get his personal insights and so forth and so on. Obviously, again, as I always caveat these things, especially because I've given his name, he's obviously busy. He obviously travels, preaches, does other things. So it's not that maybe you'll get an instantaneous response, but if you're genuinely curious about his complete insight on these things, then I would suggest you speak to him. The other devotee I do not know, but Maharaj introduces him and gives a link to where you can find his information to make inquiries, again, about his personal perspective and his overall ideals on this subject and maybe other subjects as well. In my own reflection, I've had this discussion and have given sort of classes and so forth before on the general topic about sexuality within the context of our Gaudiya practice. And there has been a theme. It's not a new theme, because I remember seeing it presented many, many years ago, where there is a observation that within the institutional framework, there has been many problems regarding the ability to digest and then socially interact on the basis of our Gaudiya practice. So one of the reasons is because for many devotees, when they joined in a group or collective mindset. I'm joining this entire grouping, and I'm becoming a part of this entire grouping. And on the basis of that, whatever social dynamics took place or take place even to this day in the grouping has a very deep effect on those who have somehow or another kept the mindset of being indispensably connected to the collective. So I've often emphasized and spoken in other classes that bhakti is a personal pursuit done in a collective environment. Bhakti itself is not a collective pursuit. It is an individual personal pursuit done in a collective environment. The recommended collective environment is of realized souls, high class of sadhus, etc. This is what has been recommended in the theological framework for that collective practice, right? Individually practicing in the collective, but the collective should be composed of these kinds of sadhus, high class of realized sadhus. We know that may not always be available. So we do so by alternative means, by studying the writings of high class of realized sadhus. When we have the opportunity to get their association, we get their association. But the point being, the ideal of what is individual practice in a collective is really based on this standard. Now we know that it's not the case that in the overall institutional collective in any given sangha, that every single person is that standard that is recommended in Shastra. The realized high class of Rasik, Babu, Vaishnav. That's just not the reality. So it tends to be that the practice also takes place in the association of other aspirants who are in various stages of unfoldment. And again, when we have the mindset that we are a blended or homogeneous part of the collective, not an individual involved with the collective, then it becomes sometimes very, very hard to digest collective mindsets. So in this particular podcast, there seemed to be an emphasis on some of the failings of the collective mindset around sexuality, around digesting what is the meaning even of our Srila Prabhupada and our Guru Varga's statements around the practice of sexuality. For instance, the statement of sex should only be done for procreation, right? And how that statement, according to one of the visions on the podcast, I'll have you go back and listen to it, is that tenable or not? Is that possible or not? And has that been the root cause of perhaps, especially being dependent on the collective mindset, as I mentioned, is that maybe one of the things that has caused debilitating kinds of guilt and suppression and so forth and so on. So here's our culprit. Our culprit is the idea of the Acharya, right, in this case Srila Prabhupada, other Acharyas as well, imposing something that's not really tenable. Right? Of course, why it's not tenable wasn't fully exhausted. It's just an assumption that based on, I guess whatever, maybe individual dynamics or maybe observed dynamics in other people, because some examples were brought up, etc., that it is not tenable, that this is a standard that can be kept. Hence, it leads to deception, deception, disingenuous dealings, etc., etc. So it's a situation where there's an idea that even though we accept the Acharya, hopefully, I'm saying hopefully, we accept the Acharya as being beyond the purview of the 4 defects of conditioned souls, and that what they will say is actually part of the direct speaking of Bhagavan in his absolute truth. So let me make that connection now. For instance, Al Srila Prabhupada said that sex life is only for procreation. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna said, Dhamma Virudeshu Kamoshmi Bhartashabha. I am that sex life which is not contrary to religious principles. If we examine what the ultimate religious principle is, it's explained in Srimad Bhagavatam that dismissing all other kinds of religious principles which do not align with pure bhakti. This is in the verse, Dhamma Protita Kaitavatra. In this verse, it's saying any kind of religious practice, dharma, which does not align, support, or have connection to the ultimate dharma, which is expressed by Rupa Goswami in the verse, because this Vastu Nirdeshtatmaka verse, the second verse of Bhagavatam, its clear presentation is there in Rupa Goswami's definition of pure bhakti, which is the highest dharma. Anya Abhilasita Sunya, that those who are coming to bhakti are coming under the individual pursuit of obtaining Anukulyena Krishna Anusilanam, the complete endeavor of body, mind, and words to do what is anukul to the service of Krishna. Krishna never means Krishna alone, according to Jiva Goswami, but it means Krishna, his entourage, Radhika, everything, to do anukul seva with all endeavors, void of any other desire than that. You understand? So here now we've described what is the highest kind of dharma. So Krishna's statement in Bhagavad Gita that I am that sex life which is not contrary to dharma means that sex life which is not contrary to the principle of what is pure bhakti. So Al Srila Prabhupada couching in sort of Western parlance that sex life should only be used for procreation was not really a statement covering the full spectrum of various levels of unfoldment of devotees, different devotees, history of various kinds of sexual trauma. It was not a blanket statement on how to deal with your personal karmic portfolio, inclusive of all kinds of sexual impressions that may be there from the past. It was not a blanket statement for that. It was a statement about sexuality in relation to pure devotion. So let's mark this so we get a clarity on what that statement was. It was a statement in relation to sexuality and what is pure devotion. So in that regard, it really was not a statement about the individual practice of sexuality, inclusive of a person's karmic portfolio and impressions and all of that. That was dealt with Srila Prabhupada, hopefully by devotees on the individual basis of inquiry. Somebody would write to Srila Prabhupada, "Oh, Srila Prabhupada, I'm having trouble dealing with lust." Srila Prabhupada may suggest, "Oh, then you should get married, because within married life, you can regulate your sex life." The highest standard of that regulation is to perform the seva of creating a portal or a means by which souls can enter this world in the family of those practicing devotion, hence giving facility to a continuum of those who had bhakti impressions to come into a devotee family and continue their practice of bhakti. That is a service to Krishna, and because it is a service to Krishna, it is not devoid of the statement of Anya Abhilasita Sunya, meaning having no other desire. There is a service element here when I'm trying to engage with my married spouse for the purpose of creating a portal of allowing souls to come into this world to fulfill their potential in bhakti. That's the service. So in that way, that's the ideal standard of how sexuality can be used in service to Krishna. Now, Srila Prabhupada obviously was not void of understanding the dynamics of the social fabric that people came to Krishna consciousness from. Very few people came from a background of celibate practice, etc., etc. So that was not unknown not only to Srila Prabhupada, but to our entire Guru Vargas. If you will read Madhurya Kandambini, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, in assessing all the stages of Anistita Bhakti, etc., etc., and the various stages of mental issues that arise and attempt to chant Harinam, like Loy, Vikshepa, Pratipati, Koshoy, etc., even especially in Koshoy. Koshoy means the tendencies of our past impressions. So none of our Guru Vargas were absent of the knowledge of the peaks and valleys of the unfoldment of an aspirant when trying to practice bhakti, inclusive of the challenges with dealing with sexual energy. So now, it's not that we have to reinvent the wheel, because there was some suggestion by the guest that where there has been observation of either untenable or apparently non-working elements of bhakti, and here's where I may take a little exception, that what was observed to be non-tenable or broken, quoting some of his words, is the structure that was put together by conditioned souls. So it wasn't the bhakti or the view of the acharyas that was broken, or the suggested means of rectification, etc. None of that was broken that came from Guru Sadhu and Sastra. The attempted application of it may have been broken by conditioned souls who are putting together a collective of practice, and individuals coming into that collective now, especially as I mentioned in the very beginning, with the mindset that I'm indispensably connected to the collective, and therefore struggle with all kinds of internal issues. Because of that, that can't be attributed to the pure system, the pure representatives or pure dispensers of the system. It has to be put in its actual place. And the actual place is in the broken application by conditioned souls who are trying to operate in bhakti in a collective. So now once we have that differentiation, that what may be broken may truly be the application in the collective, it's not in the process of bhakti. It is not that the process of bhakti and the instructions of the acharyas will cause ideas of disingenuous relations, ideas of suppression, ideas of sexual frustration. No, not at all. It's in the misapplication in the collectives. Another point here being that I don't know why or when individual sexuality became such a public issue, unless you realize it's exactly what I said in the beginning. People have given up their individuality and placed it in the collective, and therefore it has not remained an individual unfoldment anymore, inclusive of dealing with your sexual energy and so forth and so on. Everything has been a collective, and because everything has been a collective, then we find ourselves in a situation, we find ourselves in a situation where what goes on, what is thought about us, what is said about us in the collective, then has more effect than it should be. So this is part of the problem. This is part of the problem. The differentiation between what is the collective and what is my individual pursuit has now gotten completely awry. And the two things have been conflated. And so now whenever we want to discuss something, we discuss it from the faults found in the collective. And the collective here meaning the conditioned souls and aspirants who've put together a collective sangha, institution, organization where individuals are trying to unfold and practice. So now, let's go back and look even in what to speak of the writings of the Acharyas, but in our Mool Sastra, Srimad Bhagavatam. It's mentioned there that once a person has developed some attachment, Jatasharo Matkateshu Nivigna Savakarmashu, but has not been able to conquer over all obstacles. Veda Dukatmanam Kamam. A person can see, yes, this particular issue, in this particular case, dealing with the sexual energy, due to my past material impressions, etc., is very difficult. And even though I can observe that difficulty, Prati Yogi bi Anishwaraha, I'm unable to make the pragmatic break from that activity, though I can recognize that it is pratikul or unfavorable to the pursuit of bhakti. So here is very interesting because now Srimad Bhagavatam gives a remedy for that. Inclusive in that remedy, which I'll speak about, is a feeling of remorse. So let's Tato Bachate Mamprita Shwaralu Dridhanishchaya Jisamanastamam Kamam Dukko Darakam Chagarayan. So here it's saying, even if that is the case, there is some struggle with previous impressions, not only of Kam, but of Krodh, of greed, of love, so many things. If there's some previous impressions that you're dealing with from the prior karmic package, and in the current iteration, there's some struggle, then it's saying, go on practicing bhakti. What is the meaning of practicing bhakti here? What our Guru Vargas have given. Unless we're willing to accept the idea that the Guru Vargas have some fallibility. Or we start to attribute conditioned humanism to the Guru Vargas. In the name of progress or progressive or, I don't know, like the particular guest quoted many times, out of the box thinking. So of course, whenever we use statements like that, then it's pretty generic parlance that sometimes you have to get clarity on. What's the box and what's outside of it versus what's inside of it? That's a genuine question. Because when you suggest to do something outside the box, we all have to be on the same page as to what the box was. Other than that, it starts to become more of a word, a statement that engenders a certain feeling in various individuals. And there's not a clear pinpointed idea what the box was that we need to be outside of as opposed to inside of it. And it then raises the question, well, if we're going outside the box, and let's say the box was the teachings of our Guru Vargas and the presentations of Sastra and Sadhus, which are the three vetting methods for everything, then what is the grasping point outside of that is so secure that we can step outside of that and feel that we can make progress in bhakti by linking onto this thing that's outside the box? If that wasn't the box, that's fine. And therefore we need to just define what the box was. And if you're saying the box is just the collective mentality of, again, aspirants who are composed of conditioned souls, then yeah, maybe very well need to step outside the box. But if the box is the actual basis of Guru, Sadhu, and Sastra, how will we step outside that box and truly be in the mode of practicing bhakti? How is it possible? So I would add, that's a question I'm putting on the table. Now, this idea also that when we say that we're going to step outside the box to fix something or to correct something, right? Or to correct something, it would indicate the tool set that we're going to use to do that. Well, we're going to employ a certain set of tools to do that. So the next question that arises is, what tool set outside of the tools given in Parampara would be more effective and have a deeper sense of efficacy in dealing with whatever the thing is than what's present in the tools given by Parampara? These are just obvious questions, and these questions are not meant to engender a sense of challenge of so-called progressive thinking versus, I don't know what we want to call it, traditionalism or etc. So I'm not putting any of those boxes in place in the discussion. This is simply questions on the basis of taking facts as facts. So a fact is, we have been dependent on the modality of following the tool set for fixing anything, of investing our faith currency in what has been given in Guru Parampara, with the idea, Shraddha Shabde Vishwasha Kahe Shudrida Nishjoy, Krishna Bhakti Koila Savakam Kritoy, that whatever needs to be solved, it can be solved in bhakti. It may not be solved in bhakti under the collective mindset, but in the individual practice, which bhakti ultimately is as personal as your DNA, right? It has the ability and efficacy to solve that. Or again, we have to come up with the idea the Guru Vargas somehow were not absolute in their ability to perceive what would be effective in solving the conditional stage of the jiva, to move the jiva towards progressive bhakti. Oh, Haribo Madhu, I'm looking at your question. So let me kind of finish and then I'll come back. And if I don't do that timely, please post the question again so I can remember and I will answer it. So this is, I'm addressing that the tool set given by our Guru Parampara, especially if you read Madhurya Kandamini, is completely equipped with the ability to solve whatever issues arise due to the karmic packages of the conditioned soul. If not, we cannot say it's an absolute truth because it has relative efficacy in solving problems. So it cannot be called absolute because its efficacy in solving problems is relative. It's relative to the problem, it's relative to the individual. But if we say something is an absolute truth, it has an absolute potency. If we're saying Nam is Nam Nam Akri Bahuda Nija Sava Shakti, it is Sava Shakti. Shakti here doesn't mean just the theological esoteric idea of Shakti meaning Radhika, etc. It means it has all kinds of power. Because the genesis of the material world is also coming from Mool Shakti Tattva. The material world is not generated from its own Shakti somewhere else, it's also coming from Mool Shakti. So if the practice of bhakti is fully imbued with the Mool Shakti, but somehow or another, when the Mool Shakti is translated into a tool set by an aspirant to deal with their conditional life, its efficacy becomes relative to the history of this particular karmic iteration. It becomes relative to the collective I'm in. It becomes relative to different emotional states I have. Then it's not absolute. And we're back to square one in terms of, is there such a thing as an absolute truth? And the reason I'm also bringing this up is because the one standing in the practice of Vaishnavism that we have, or any genuine bona fide spiritual practice, is that it is predicated that here is a place you can repose faith because it is absolute, because it is infallible. This is the whole basis of what we're telling people in conditioned life. This is infallible. What we may be failing to tell people is the nuances of what I mentioned in the beginning. This practice is an individual practice. It is not a collective. You practice it in a collective, but you're not the collective. You're an individual who's gone to a suitable, anukul collective, hopefully. Anukul here means favorable collective. The highest standard of a favorable collective is those who are realized souls, high class of Vaishnavas. Again, I mentioned the rarity of that. And I mentioned the predominance of being in a collective where there are other aspirants who are in the stages of unfoldment. But we have to differentiate that from our individual practice of bhakti. So one, why my individual sexuality will be a point of discussion for anybody is a curiosity. Probably because, again, under the collective mindset, everybody's in tightrope walking mode, I should say, about everybody else's sexuality. Who's doing what, who's feeling what, who is fallen, who's not fallen, who's renounced, who's not renounced. But this is also addressed in Manasiksha. If you read Manasiksha, in the verse, Pratishta Asha Drasta Sopachani Ramani Meinatet, Srila Raghunath Das Goswami addresses this. In the commentaries there's a whole addressing, at least by my Guru Parapadma, he's written a whole commentary expressing what is Paranishta, Shwanishta, Nirapeksh Vaishnavas. This means different psychological mindsets of practice which become influenced by Pratishta Asha. Pratishta means, it's common parlance that it means the desire for name and fame, etc., etc. But pratishta also means being situated in a concern about my self-interest. Who is looking at me? Who is observing me? What are they thinking about me? So even if you're not looking for adoration or puja, labdha, and pratishta, you're looking, who's noticing me? What are they thinking about me? Why is it important what they think about me? This is also pratishta. And the result of that is it produces practice as swanishta, parinishta, and nirapeksha. I'm not going into detail. You can read it in Manasiksha. I think it's verse number 7. And he speaks about the different kind of psychological issues that take place in the practice due to this kind of mindset. And in each of those cases, the practitioner identifies with the collective. And therefore, pratishta, or concern about self-interest in regard to imagery, perception of themselves, etc., all becomes very important. When the very basis of the practice of bhakti is anukulyena Krishna anusilanam. Anusil, the seal dhatu means endeavors. Endeavors are of different kinds. I'm not giving a class here on Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu or Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu Bindu, but it means both Cheshtarup and Bhavrup. Means moods and endeavors with the physical body, etc., etc. So if you're endeavoring to practice bhakti and from previous impressions of karma, either you are more or less affected by the urges of sexuality or sensuality in this case, then that's your personal situation. And if you are practicing bhakti personally in relation to, because Rupa Goswami, when he gives the practice of bhakti, for instance, Guru Padashraya, he never mentions you and all your friends Guru Padashraya, you and all your associates Guru Padashraya. He's speaking to an individual. If you want to practice bhakti, Guru Padashraya, etc. Tata Diksha Shikshari, etc., etc. So it's an individual thing. Now, if you have Vaishnav Maitri with someone in whom you have deep faith, then it's expressed, Dadati Pratagrinati Guyam Akyati Prichati. You may give expression one to another, revealing in confidence, I'm dealing with this, I'm dealing with that. You understand? Certainly to Guru, in Vishrambena Seva, you can reveal, oh Gurudev, I'm struggling with this, I'm struggling with that. Or not. Gurudev, by your kripa, I'm not struggling with this or struggling with that. But again, when you take all of this out of the idea of a collective, you never find terms like broken. You never find terms like the need to fix. And if you do find those terms, then it is something that's questionable by anybody practicing Vaishnavism. Well, if this could be broken, you understand? If this can be broken, what is absolute? So, Madhu Prabhu, let me answer your question because you're so patiently waiting. So I'll repeat the question because I don't know if anybody can see it or not. But it says, is there room in bhakti for engaging in and enjoying the healthy sexual pleasure potency? So, the nature of the jiva in the material world is completely centered around their enjoyment. And Bhagavan himself has given the freedom, right, of choice to pursue that path of individual enjoyment, understanding that concomitantly there is also misery because the material world has that duality. It is not absolute. There's a term called Advaya Gyan Paratattva, means when something is absolutely of one essential principle. Like in the spiritual world, it is not possible for us to perceive it or conceive it. It is truly achintya. And sometimes people, they also in this word achintya. Achintya just is like an excuse word. No. Achintya means that which can't be, chinta means contemplated, because it's not in the experience of the conditioned soul. So it is achintya how even suffering in the spiritual world is happiness. But in Ujjwala Mani is clearly mentioned there. Dukkam adikam chitte shukattvena evarujayate. That even in the stage called rag, in the progression of praying, that thing which apparently is full of dukkha produces the highest kind of happiness. You understand? This is not something that we can mentally try to massage and come up with an answer to. Well, wait a minute, if you're suffering, how will you enjoy it? It will not happen. It's an experiential thing, right? But the point being here in the material world, sure, the principle of being able to enjoy sex life or any other kind of material enjoyment according to your karmic facility is always available. But also is the reverse response, which is that dukkha is also here, which is birth, old age, disease, and death. And in the other kind of adhyatmic, adhidaivic, and adibhautic miseries. Means miseries coming from one's own self, from others, or from the natural disturbances by the demigods, etc. So, for instance, in adhyatmic and adibhautic miseries, based on sexuality, in my adhyatmic desire to enjoy, also there'll be adhyatmic klesh, because I have a desire to enjoy with this particular woman, etc., etc., others, right? But that person has no desire to enjoy with me. This causes adhyatmic suffering. And also, to some degree, adibhautic suffering because another person's involved. Somehow or another, there's an agreement. Yes, we'll mutually come together and enjoy. But after we enjoy, emotions become entangled, things don't work out. 2 weeks later, people hate each other. So now there's adhyatmic, adibhautic miseries again. You understand? So you can't, in the material world, divorce that. But the application of the desire to serve, and this is something else that should be kind of really put in perspective. There were many references in the podcast to sexuality in the divine paradigm or in the spiritual paradigm. But that sexuality, though, quote, obvious, is not like mundane sexuality. There is no scope in the jiva until they have some degree of deep realization. What is the nature of praying? Because the calm means the sensuality of the spiritual paradigm or spiritual world is not based in individual desire. It is completely based in the opposite. You understand? It's clearly mentioned. Atmasuke duke gopyo na nahiko vichara. The highest kind of sensuality presentation in the Leela, in the spiritual world, is obviously in gopis and Krishna. But here it's saying gopyon. Gopyon means plural. In the gopis headed by Radhika, nahiko vichar, there's no consideration atmasuke duk of our happiness or distress. Rather, everything is only done for the pleasure of Krishna. Can we say that about our individual sensual arrangements in this world? What is Krishna's enjoyment in our individual sensual enjoyments? It's not present there. Therefore, it is to some degree outside the scope of pure bhakti. Because remember, pure bhakti is based in anya, abhilas, sunya. Think about it. Anya, abhilas, sunya. Not having another desire except the desire of Krishna's happiness, or Krishna's anukul more precisely. You understand? Now, the psychological implication of that. Should it be debilitating or frustrating? Well, I can't enjoy if I want to practice bhakti? No. Why should it be? Is it debilitating when we're trying to, even in anything else in the material world, we're trying to accomplish a certain goal. We put efforts into that goal, and in putting those efforts into that goal, we restrict ourselves from other things not progressive to that goal. We look at that as an accomplishment. I want to be a great athlete. Therefore, I give up certain things in my diet. I love pizza, but I can't have pizza. I love ice cream, but I can't have ice cream. I have to go to the gym, and there's some austerity involved there. But because the self-interest is being accomplished, we easily accept that. We easily accept it in many cases, even when it's very difficult. And in fact, as a shadow way, it kind of gives pleasure because we're accomplishing that goal. So when we come to the path of bhakti and there's a goal which is set, anya abhilasita sunya, to be void of any other desire except for Krishna's anukul, Krishna's happiness. That's what pure bhakti is. I may not be at the level of pure bhakti. It should not be frustrating, debilitating, or psychologically crushing that I'm not at the highest stage of bhakti, and therefore I have to adjust bhakti and everything about it to make me feel good about not being in the highest position related to bhakti. No. I will look where my adhikar is, where my unfoldment is, and as the verse I quoted earlier from the 11th canto, with remorse. Just like on my day that I didn't go to the gym and I cheated by having a pizza ice cream sandwich. On that day, I'll be a little down on myself. You understand? Because I'm looking at a goal. In the same way, I'll have a healthy remorse. Healthy remorse. Because I'm pursuing the highest possible goal, which is service to love of God, Krishna praying. It is the highest attainment. So I will be healthily, if that's the right word, I'll have healthy remorse that I'm unable to meet the standards and accomplish the goal adequately at a particular level of adhikar. But what was the instruction given? Tato bhajate mamprita sharalu dhritanishchaya. With more fixed determination, I'll go on practicing because there is absolute efficacy in the practice given by the acharyas. Absolute efficacy. I can have full faith in that. I cannot necessarily put my faith in modalities generated from the conditioned atmosphere. It may seem okay, and it's easy, and it's quick, and it actually feels good, because in most cases, it is predominated by the mode of sattva gun. And because it's predominated by the mode of sattva gun, Bhagavad Gita says it gives a source of pleasure. But one thing is that it conditions us also to a false sense of knowledge. So, my point here being that there really isn't, in many cases, a crisis, so to speak, when you look at it from another angle, of the nature of the human makeup and the human psychology versus, quote, the, quote, pure standard of, quote, traditional practice of bhakti. That dichotomy is sort of not real. For instance, the whole idea of repression in sexuality. That a person is trying to control the impressions from their previous karma regarding sensual pushes doesn't lead to repression until you add in those other elements, like collective mindset. Then it becomes repressive, because now the antennas of my self-interest are fully aroused, and now what everybody else thinks about me, what everybody else says about me, what is my perception in the collective, all becomes majorly important to my sense of well-being. When as if I had entered as an individual, why was my individuality given up in the first place in lieu of accepting a collective mindset? Especially a collective mindset of others who are unfolding and are also aspirants on the path. Why would I have given up my own individual position of aspiration with all of its nuances to accept an entire collective of people with their nuances and particular karmic impressions, etc.? So really the adjustment is not at all within the realm of the purity of the practice as disseminated by our parampara of bhakti. The actual adjustment is in the manufactured or attempted putting together of various collectives of practice. Those collectives are actually meant to help us and inspire us, not to debilitate us. But now we've seen the effects of having somehow or another garnered people from individuality into a collective mindset and the destructive features that is taken. And now we're trying to fix bhakti rather than recognizing it was the collective mindset that was problematic, not bhakti. So this is just my initial reflections. Obviously, as I mentioned, by hearing again everything, also by doing deeper reflection, other points may come out. And again, I want to emphasize, this is not at all a situation of verses. And that should not enter into the atmosphere of this discussion at all. This is not this versus this. This is reflection and bringing out points from another perspective. And in doing so, setting up a template by which we can kind of look and say, okay, well, let me measure this point against this point and look at it again and see and so forth. And I would think that certainly, and Maharaj has also mentioned this directly, he wanted healthy discussion. He mentioned this even prior about all the podcasts, not just this particular topic, but he wanted healthy discussion. And healthy discussion means, like, if you consider health in relation to going to see your doctor, you want your doctor to use the largest amount of variables in your diagnosis as possible to get the most, what we call now, a holistic approach to your diagnosis and treatment. You don't want a myopic, simply let's stay in this, quote, literally box now, and only have the healthy discussion in that box, because then that's not holistic. And it's truly a box. You understand? So this reflection is meant to be that. It's meant to be a reflection, looking at it from the angle that perhaps that a lot of the psychological, so to speak, or emotional damage that may have given rise to an urge to investigate, attempt to adjust what we've seen as the practice of bhakti, may in fact be our perception of inadequacy in the collective mindset, as opposed to looking at the individual unfoldment in oneself, first of all, and then being able to apply individuality to each person in the collective. And more than anything else, also being very absorbed, because bhakti requires avesh. Avesh means absorption. So it's very difficult to become absorbed in your own self when you're constantly digesting the communal mindset. You understand? Your personal avesh should give rise to deeper understandings, moods, and insights and taste in bhakti, which you therefore want to come back and share in a pragmatic way, in an emotional way with the collective. And if the whole collective is thinking like that, you'll find very few problems in a collective. It's only when the collective, there's some corruption in it, because you'll find many different personal agendas going on, and in many cases simultaneously, and those personal agendas are not synced with the idea of Anukulena Krishnanusilanam. For Krishna's Anukul, they're not synced to that, they're synced to the different personal agendas. And therefore people want to get out and express, right, their personal agenda. And everybody will validate everything by saying, and there's so many others who think like this. That's one of the signs. There's so many others who are feeling this, going through this, experiencing this. The first thing is, what's most important is yourself experiencing it. And you need to fix that. My experience, not a collective experience. Because in many cases, what that is a search for validation of your perception. First of all, we should vet whether the perception in myself is accurate. Is that perception that I'm speaking on, trying to fix, trying to, bring other people involved? Is the perception in myself clear? And is it truly what I think it is? Once we can get to that point, then we can go to the collective and get another genuine opinion on a person's personal experience, etc. Other than that, and I'm trying to make this a little clearer, because what can happen also, because we have so many material impressions, and we have suffered by and I've described suffering before. Suffering is really the vicarious identification with the material energy. I'm not going through that now. But because everybody's had that experience, it is very easy, especially according to your maturation in bhakti, to easily lasso somebody into an arena where we can come together in cathartic. Very easy to lasso people in, because everybody's had challenges. So as soon as you put out the means by which people can come and get some emotional, psychological catharsis, it's on. Yeah, let's go. You understand? So, but the real ability to adequately deal with what the root problem is to, and now I'm being a little esoteric, but it's very important. If you can understand the catharsis of Krishna speaking to Arjuna at Kurukshetra at the battle, it will help your own personal catharsis so much. Someone may feel that sounds very rote, traditional philosophical presentation. But if it's true, it's true. If it's not true, it's not. And there's only one way to find out. That's by getting to the point of being able to digest the statement itself. If you can serve the catharsis of Krishna to Arjuna at Kurukshetra, first of all, get to that place, right? Contemplate that place. If you can get to that, it will help your own personal catharsis so much. And then you'll help the collective so much. And the true feature of a bhakti sangha will be manifest, not a collective. Right now we're operating in many cases, what we're calling a sangha is really a mutual aspirant collective. All right, I think I don't want to overdo this here. Mother Malupabu, hopefully, yeah, you answered. Yeah, so thank you it was a very nice question. And again, I'm hoping devotees are able to take this in context, again, as a personal reflection. And I apologize again to devotees who have asked questions that I haven't gotten to and seem to have, sort of given priority to this. And I did, as I mentioned in the beginning, because it was fresh, both in the inquiries I got and fresh also in my hearing. And I want to give the reflection before maybe some points dissipated, in lieu of doing other things and so forth. All right, my Dandavat Pranam devotees. Vanchakalpaturubhyascha Kripashinnavevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Gurudev, Jai Shri Prabhupada, Jai Guru Parampara, Jai Radhe Radhe.